Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the business end of a Sig P320, and I just wanted to go over this as an engineer, just going over the mechanical aspects of this that will prevent the firearm or cause the firearm to fire. First of all, on the business end, the striker assembly is here. We can see this hook that's hooked up to the striker assembly slash there's a spring in here. You pull this back, slingshots forward, there's a firing pin, and it goes into the primer. So that's the primary mechanism by which a round will go off. Is it hooks onto the striker here. This pulls back like this. There's quite a bit of force. So it pulls back, and when you rack the slide, that's what happens. It engages with the sear, which is this piece of metal here, hooks up with the sear and engages right there. You can see where the lubricant has moved, but that sear surface there is what holds that striker back. Now you could say, is my life only resting on this ledge? And it's worthy to talk about that. You know, this is only about like a millimeter of metal. You know, that's that. Now, it's shaped in such a way that it actually requires a little bit of force to pull the striker a little bit further back before it can launch forward. So the sear is designed such that it will require a little bit more force, pulling back a little bit more before it will release. So for the most part, it's not just going to slip off. But what if it does slip off? What happens if you pull this back and release it? Let me show you. So if you pull this back all the way and release it, let's do that again. There we go, all the way, look how far back that is, and release it. It goes forward, right? But you'll notice it's not actually all the way forward, and it doesn't ever get all the way forward because of this tab here. Now, what this thing does is when it's up, or in the correct orientation, when it's down, there's basically an engagement surface on the striker assembly that cannot go further than this point unless this is depressed. And this is what you would call like a striker block or a channel, a striker channel block. And this needs to be depressed to cause the striker to proceed forward. Now what happens, so we've just released it and it's now resting. The spring has forced it all the way forward and it's now resting on the block, on the channel block or striker block. So if you push this down, how much force will be released into the primer when this goes down? So just say the sear has already failed. You're now sitting on a striker that's sort of not cocked but not fully released either, quote unquote. What happens if now the channel, the block has been released? Nothing. So the spring mechanism only causes it to go as far as the block but not further. So when in a firing position, this is down and then the sear is released and inertia carries the striker beyond this point. So there's really, if you're in a situation where the sear has failed but has now been blocked by the striker block, a subsequent release of the striker block will not cause any movement in the striker. So this is one of the mechanisms by which people have hypothesized, could cause a unknown discharge. Like, so the sear has failed, but could the channel block fail at a later point and then cause an uncommanded discharge? And the answer is no. There's no actual force left after it's already gone forward and caught by the striker block. That's that. So under normal firing condition, the trigger is pulled which will release the sear. So the sear will then move down, forcing the striker back just a little bit further. And then, but the first thing that happens is that that little lever pops up. So when you go to pre-tension, that's that spring force that you're feeling is moving the striker channel block out of the way. So, you know, you can think about it in any condition you want. So just say the sear has already failed, you pull out the gun, then you disengage the block, it won't go off. And it's not cocked either. So you basically have a dead gun at that point. If it's in your holster and for some reason that channel block comes up for any reason at all, if the sear has already released, you could even pull the trigger and it's blocked. Basically, it's blocked. As in, there's no more spring force left when it's sitting on the striker safety. So there's no real mechanism that I see that would result in uncommanded discharges. You have to pull the trigger for that striker block to move out of the way. Now, if you have a situation where both the sear and the striker block have, for some reason, they're just not working. So this doesn't reliably latch, and say the channel block is permanently damaged, that it's never really working. So any release of the sear will result in a fired round. Then that is a highly repeatable situation. You should be able to take that gun and repeat it again and again and again. Honestly, like there's not magic. These things, and there are two mechanisms here. You would have to have a sear that had obvious geometry problems or mechanical problems, in addition to the striker block also having some sort of defect or problem or assembly error. So you need two systems to fail at the same time. And it's not that two systems cannot fail at the same time, right? You do something a million times over, maybe you do, but it won't result in a firearm that goes off one time and then never ever again, right? You will have observable mechanical problems with both systems. It's not magic. The other thing I want to say is there's a lot of people, oh, why don't they just put a dongle? Just put a dongle. Well, the reason they don't put a dongle is because the Sig P320 is unique in that it doesn't actually need a dongle. So if moving the trigger back is what is required to discharge a round with these two safety mechanisms in place, one way you could get the trigger to move back is with a drop. And then the weight of the trigger bar and the trigger inertia, so the frame stops, but then the weight of the trigger continues to move back, okay? So it continues to move back. And we're talking like, 50, 100 Gs of pressure or something like that, a big drop straight into concrete or a mallet to the back. You have the inertia of the frame going effectively forward and the trigger going back. Now, on a Glock, the way they retard the movement of the trigger and prevent it from going off in the case of a drop is that plastic dongle. And that plastic dongle interfaces with the frame and prevents the trigger from going back unless a finger is depressing the dongle, right? So finger is depressing the dongle, then the trigger can move back. So your life is actually on the line on a Glock from just a tiny little piece of plastic engaging with another piece of plastic. On the Glock, the way they've prevented your life being on the line due to a little plastic tab is they redesigned the whole system. So it's not a Glock clone. So when the trigger goes back, you notice this entire mechanism here is actually needing to travel forward. And there's also spring pressure. So the reason they don't need a dongle is because when this lands, this trigger bar is imparting force. It needs to impart force this way to go off, but it's actually going this way. And there's also spring force going this way. And then this is fighting to overcome it. In the original drop issues, the counterbalancing forces were a little bit wonky. So you had to drop in this angle, and then the trigger still had most of its weight working at the arc that it needs to work on, but the trigger bar now has only like 30–40% of its inertia available to it to fight off the inertia coming from the trigger. So in certain angles, and I'm sure certain levels of lubrication and so forth, it was possible to cause a drop, to cause the trigger to move back and overcome the inertia of the trigger bar and the spring. But since the first Gen 1, all of the trigger shoes, the trigger shoe, have been basically halved in weight. And while it's a balance, because you can't just make this zero, because then you'd have an issue where you could have a potential problem of dropping forward. Even though spring pressure is keeping it back, ultimately there is a balance of inertia that's at play here. So that's why you don't need a trigger doohickey like the Glock or a Sig, is because the trigger bar moves in the opposite direction. Now, you can like or not like this setup. You could say, I prefer to trust my life to a little plastic dingle. That's up to you. I'm actually happy with either. They're all very well designed systems. We're very blessed, right, guys, that these are all very, very reliable and safe systems. The only gun I pulled apart, and I couldn't exactly work out, what quote unquote makes it safe, is the Ruger LCP2, which is like a single action hammer-fired gun, which you do you. I'll do me. I'm not exactly sure how that's made safe, but yeah, here we've got, as I said, you need 2 separate mechanisms to fail at the same time, and if you did, you would have a gun that would repeatably fail. There wouldn't be like went off one time, could never reproduce it. That doesn't make any sense. And then the reason they don't have the doohickey is because they have a trigger bar that moves in the opposite direction of the trigger shoe, and the inertia cancels each other out. So that's it, guys. That's it. I have not seen anyone propose or show what is wrong on FCUs that have gone wrong, quote unquote. I've never seen any reproducible issues beyond the original drop safety thing, which is like 10 years ago at this point. And even if you had like an aftermarket trigger, this is an Apex, aftermarket trigger shoes wouldn't have that problem. And it was only in very specific angles. Now, I'm not saying that was an issue. It's good that they addressed it, but ultimately, you would have to have like a reliable problem. And I do think a problem could be created. Like I said, these are, it's a real thing, but you'd be able to detect it. Now, it could even be an assembly error. So this plunger is like one of the flimsiest ones on the market, in my opinion. Like on the Glock and on the M&P, you have like a full camming system over here. But look, it doesn't change the fact that this would actually have to be damaged, and damaged in a repeatable way to cause it to fail, quite frankly. Okay, and one last thing, like, remember how I said that there's a certain amount of pressure to get the striker to slip off that sear? You can actually see it here. I don't know if I can get the riding light, but you see that's the striker hook there. It goes to hook onto the assembly, and you can actually see it. Let's see if I can get the right lighting. You can see it sort of hook up there. I don't know if you can see the sear sliding, and then the hook engages. But this is the point where the striker sear is holding back the striker in its rearmost position. And when you pull the trigger to the first wall, the slack that you feel from here to here, is what it takes to remove that plunger out of the way. So if you want to feel how much pressure it takes to, you know, get that striker block out of the way, that's what you feel when you get up to the wall. Now at this point you get to the wall, and what you're actually doing at that point is actually moving the sear down, which is also moving the striker back. So you're putting a little bit more spring force into the striker. And as I pull, you may catch a glimpse of it actually moving the striker back just a little bit more, but more importantly, you can feel it. So if you are just dry firing, you can feel how much pressure it takes to remove that striker block out of the way. It's very minimal. But then you have the wall, and all that wall is the pressure it takes to get that sear to slip off the hook of the striker. That's what that wall is. So that's how much pressure it is. So, you know, it's like, on my gun here, it's like maybe 6-7 pounds, something like that. And that's what that creep is, because the sear has to move back, and the striker needs to move back to clear out of the way. And that's what all of this pressure is. Now, without the striker on the hook, you can fully depress, and all you have is this spring pressure. So everything that you're feeling with respect to when you get to the wall is exactly how much pressure that it takes to actually overcome the sear and the striker engagement and getting it to fall off. You need to put a considerable amount of force at the wall to cause it to do that. So that's just for you at home, basically. Like, if you want to know how much pressure it takes, because I can't give you Newton meters. Even if I gave you Newton meters, you know, it'd be hard to understand. But this is what it feels like to cause the sear to fall off that ledge. And so if you've got a pistol that has like a 1/2 pound trigger, then it's going to fall off that sear very easily. That's why with those kinds of firearms, you typically have manual safeties and stuff like that. But on the Sig, that wall, and like any striker fire actually, that wall is basically what it takes to overcome the sear pressure from the counteracting striker. All right, until next time, see you around.